Hi, everybody. I'm going to welcome you, and we're having a. Please come sit down. I need the timer for sit right there in front. He's a good doobie and sit right in the front. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Please enjoy some of our snacks and refreshments. And my name is Krista Hennessy, and I'm here for the committee of What's Falmouth Reading. And this is our second event as we read Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And I hope that by the size of this crowd, I'm hoping that you've all taken that in maybe more than once in preparation. So tonight we have a really interesting and exciting panel. But first I want to do a little housekeeping. So can I ask you please to silence your cell phones? And to let you also know that FCTV is here, and just to be mindful of that. I'll try to be nice. Also that we do have an exit down here in case it's necessary, though I don't think it will be. And I want to mention, if I may, the next events that are coming up for Falmouth Reads Together. We had a wonderfully successful open mic on Saturday night, for those of you who were there and saw it. It was really fabulous. I hope we can do that again sometime. Stephanie, thank you. And tonight we have our panel discussion. The book discussion group is on Thursday, April 19th from 6 to 7 at the Falmouth Public Library in the Bay Room, which is right over there. We are also sponsoring, and this is kind of a big event, a community anti-bias workshop, and that is being hosted by No Place for Hate, and we're thrilled about that, and facilitated by the Anti-Defamation League. So that is a free opportunity. I believe you must register, right, ahead of time. So please think about that. I think it could be valuable in many aspects of our life to help us continue the conversations that we've been starting. And our final event will be a conversation on race through poetry, and that's going to be Saturday, April 28th from 2 to 4 right here back in this room. Two well-known poets, facilitated by our own Alice Kochimba, are going to talk about race through their poetry, and that should be a really interesting and wonderful event. So I want to get started for tonight. We have a wonderful panel with us, and I've been lucky enough to have dinner with some of them. I want to introduce them properly, too. I'm going to start here with Mr. John Reed, who is a member of the NAACP of Cape Cod and the executive director of the Zion Union Heritage Museum in Hyannis. And for those of you who don't know his museum, it's worth a trip. We have the Reverend Dr. Kristen Harper from the Unitarian Universalist Church in Barnstable. And we also have Yule Hopkins, who didn't want to give me a title, but I'm going to call him a community activist who came over from the Vineyard for us tonight. And so I've asked our speakers tonight to, in a way that might slightly mirror the book, to talk a bit about their histories. We wanted to sort of keep our center on Cape Cod and the islands and with race, but we're going to go right off of Cape Cod because John told me he was a wash ashore, so but that doesn't matter. We all have some kind of history here, and the histories that we do have, even if they're not here, may mirror or they may contrast from what our own experiences are, and that it's important for all that to be said. There'll be time. I want all the speakers to speak, and then I want there to be time for some questions before we move on to talking about the present. And then I hope to have some time at the end of this to talk about the future, if that works out. I think the history will take a little while, though. And John, I'm going to let you start. Okay?
Are you sure?
Well, I got a timer, so I'm gonna time it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for inviting me to come out. I have a couple of disclaimers. I have friends in the audience and relatives in the audience, so I have to tell the truth. My name is John Reed, and I am a wash ashore. And I say that because I've been called that so many times, I feel like the other people who's telling me that, they should go back to where they came from. Okay? Nevertheless, I'm from Boston, Mass. Roxbury, Dorchester. I grew up in a multicultural, multi-ethnic environment, and I grew up with plenty of cousins. Matter of fact, we have so many people in our family, none of us are lost. And we have cousins here. And Diana's sitting in front of me, and she is my bloodline cousin, and nobody believed that, but she is. And I will acknowledge my cousin. We have other people here who are my bloodline cousins as well. So who are we and what are we about? We come from a family of people who are workers. And I want to tell you right now, all of us knew how to work by age 8. And it was like a mantra in each of the families, not what will you do, is when will you get it done by. I'll say it again, not what will you do, when will you get it done by. Now, I'm the youngest son in our family of 5. And it's kind of like I'm the one who went to college. My sister went later, but not early. We put our nephews and nieces in to make sure they understood what continuity and family values were about. Yes, I am a Baptist, and I'm going to confess. And in our tradition of church and home, one was almost synonymous with the other. But now, I want to just sway away from the family issue to how I got involved. I was involved with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference Junior Division in Boston before the March on Boston. When Martin Luther King came to 12th Baptist Church, I was there as a teenager, a young person. When he came to the Blue Hill Christian Center on Blue Hill Ave, I was there. It's like an evolution of what are you influenced by? Are you influenced by social activism? Are you influenced by fairness? And who do you go to school with? Boston is a funny kind of place. Jonathan wrote a book called Savage Inequalities. That was our generation. It couldn't focus, the exact school that he mentioned, the exact conditions, was how we grew up. And to a degree, we knew that other people weren't doing as well as we were because we had family. But on the other hand, to be told to your face, you're not going to do something. I will never forget 1968, the day Martin Luther King died, we walked out of Dorchester High School. I was told, you don't come back to the school, don't come back. And I told him, no, my mother told me I could come back because she pays taxes. And my mother was bad enough to come to school and get in your face about that. But nevertheless, in 1968, I was a senior in high school and was told I should go in the service because it's better off for me. Well, it made me start thinking about what that statement meant. Vietnam was going on. Too many people signed up without questioning why. I said no. And my guidance counselor said, you know, you don't need to be that way. I said, but wait a minute. You help other kids go to college who have grades less than mine. Why can't I go? Consequently, I went. And I became what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a history teacher. I did better to be a history teacher. I became a historian. Matter of fact, when I came down here, I was 22 years old. And that was back in the days when there weren't many teachers of color in any schools down here. And the NAACP was at war with Upper Cape, with Bourne, with Falmouth, with Barnstable, about hiring teachers of color. I walked in here thinking, well, this is cool. But they forgot something. I went to UMass Amherst. At the time, the internal revolution was going on every day. I mean, I didn't have to worry about a march, a demonstration, a social action, or political justice. You just look out your window, it's going on at UMass. At least in the 70s when I was there. So I came out of that environment and came here, and all of a sudden thought I was in a time warp. I was just like, wait a minute now, something's wrong. Where are these people at? I was telling our guest, Krista, host, I'll mention something here. At 4 o'clock, you can't find people walking the street in October, November, or December. Where they go? I was in Hyannis. I used to go over the mall to see people. I mean, it was like a funny kind of thing. People say, you're from Dorchester, you're going to die. Die where? Down here or up there? I'm safer up there than I am. It's dark down here. I mean, and there's nobody around and you can't see people. But on the other hand, I went to school every day, and I'm not gonna take all the time, but I'm gonna tell the story. I went to school every day at Barnstable High School for 37 years. Matter of fact, they owed me money for going to school when I got out. But I didn't go to school for the staff. I went to school for the kids. I didn't come here to teach the black kids. I came here to teach all the kids. And I made that very clear. If you don't like what I have to say, you can leave. You know, and about getting fired, I almost got fired 3 times. But I'm going to tell you the truth. I still stuck up for the kids, even their parents. Sometimes that when parents come to school, the administration is almost preordained, ready for them. You cannot say what you want to say. They forgot. Parents pay taxes. It's their children we're talking about. My last official promotion was I became the EEO officer for the town of Barnstable for the school district. But I also got a master's degree in juvenile justice too. I had to remind the principals, you cannot expel a student or suspend someone without due process and just cause. The law became a tool for me, even when I was president of the NAACP. Today I'm vice president. But when I became president of the NAACP, the law became a tool. How do we get things done? You can't get it done the old-fashioned way because people are smart to those tactics. And they get smart to you and block you. Okay? But have they violated the law? In this next session, when we get into the present, I'm going to bring up something that's very interesting. Are they still violating the law? And if they are, what are we going to do about it? So I'm going to conclude there. I don't want to take up too much time because I want my associates and friends to have their time. Thank you.
So I grew up in Massachusetts, but in Harvard, Massachusetts, which is a very small town northwest of Boston. And there were probably 3 formative things that happened to me that led me into justice work. And the first was when I was in kindergarten, and the first time I was ever called nigger. And I thought they said nibbered. But I didn't understand what it meant. I only understood that my sister, who was 3 years older than me, was so upset that she dragged me home from school in the middle of the day. And that was the first time. My sister was also black. The rest of my family is white. There was only 2 of us who were black in that family. And so it was really huge to understand that people would call me names and exclude me for something I didn't understand yet, really what was so, I don't know, wrong at that time. And then when I was 10, the PTA had a meeting and decided that I could not play with their kids, that the white kids were no longer to play with me. And it was Halloween, I'll never forget it. It was Halloween because I was supposed to meet 2 of my friends, and I met one of them, and I said, you know, where is Lynn? And she said, well, we were told we can't play with you anymore. And I said, why not? And she said, I don't know, it has something to do with your skin. And so I went home and I asked my mother, who was friends with the school board secretary. And she called her and said, what's going on? And the secretary told her, well, they had a discussion on whether or not that Kristen could play with their kids. And what had started this was one of the kids in my grade had a dream that we had gotten married and had kids, and they were striped. And he had told his parents. And this scared her, and so that was one. And then when I was 14, and literally that was it. I didn't play with any kids, had very few, if any, friends until I left. But I do remember in the 80s, the Cambodians started being adopted all over Massachusetts, and there was a group that came to Harvard, Massachusetts, and I was tutoring them. And so I was able to hang out with them. And we were hanging out on the beach, and the police were called. Now, this is a public beach, small town, and the police came and said that we could not hang out there. And I was always mouthy, and I didn't understand why, and they turned to my brother, who's white, and said, you need to keep your little monkey in line. So those were the 3 things that for me were very formative at the same time, I was growing up in a household who had two white parents who were telling me black was beautiful. So I was having this real strange moment where I was split between, if it's not my color, because black is beautiful, what is wrong with me? So it took me a long time to understand that actually black was not what the beautiful part, what was true, but that people actually would discriminate against me because of my race. When I went to college, the AIDS epidemic was high. This is when I went to college in '88. And I'll never forget, because I loved Greg Louganis, who was a swimmer, diver. And when I found out he had AIDS, I didn't know what it was. I wasn't explained in school what this was. So I went to a class about it, and I started learning more and more about AIDS and HIV. And so I volunteered. I started volunteering with women who were Latina and black who were HIV positive. And mostly because I was scared, and I wanted to conquer this fear and figure out what I could do. So I started working with them, and they were telling me, this is in Boston, and they were telling me how they were being rejected by both their church and their family. And for me, that was absolutely beyond what I could imagine. How could your faith reject you? How could God reject you? And so I started talking about a different God that I had been given when I was growing up. And from there, I went from HIV and AIDS to domestic violence to, at that time, apartheid was ending as well. And so we had lots of marches, and so I participated in lots of marches. But my real passion at that time was HIV and AIDS. I was working after I graduated from college with my denomination's headquarters. And people kept telling me I should go into ministry, and I wanted to do social justice ministry. But the president of the denomination said, there's no way you'll get a job in a church. We aren't ready for you. And which could have been a good thing, but he didn't mean it in a positive way. He meant that because I was black, at the time, there were no black women who had been called to Unitarian Universalist congregations. So I said, I'm doing that. And so that's what I did. And all along, I continued doing work with racial justice and to try to understand how to help people talk about these issues. And my first church was in Florida, and I got pulled over a couple times for driving while black, which I thought only men had that, I thought that was something that only happened to men. And I started really looking at the systems that were perpetuating racism, that it wasn't just this, overt name-calling. It was actually in our systems and how people were being trained to look at black people, men and women, as threats and danger all the time. And I also looked at how it was affecting black people, and particularly black women. And from college on, I studied what racism did to particularly black women. Black women have the highest percentage of depression of any group. And I think it's pretty close now with all women of color. And it's one of those things that our bodies are impacted by this, and this is one of the things I really loved about this book, is talking about bodily injury and how that we carry this constantly. And so that's really where I came, and I came to Cape Cod 16 years ago. I was pulled over twice in Orleans. And I used to have long braids, and both times I've been pulled over, it has been during the day. I was not speeding. And one time the police officer said to me, your emission sticker, I thought was out. And I was like, well, it's clearly not. Can I go? And everyone had told me, just put your hands on the steering wheel, look forward, don't say anything. But I didn't get that growing up. So I'm very mouthy, and so I tended to say, you have no right to pull me over. And I'm learning that's probably not the right thing to do, but I'm so constantly and continuously, I am surprised. Even though it happens all the time, I'm still surprised to this day when it happens. And my experience here on Cape Cod has been similar to other places where people don't see you, you're invisible. And I think the hardest thing for me about coming to Cape Cod from Boston is that people will step right in front of you like you're not there. They won't put change in your hands because you're not there. They'll put it on the counter. They will follow you around. I was just surprised at how it continues, both systemically, but also the things that we thought we had gotten past. We haven't. So I guess that's where I am right now. And that's where I come from, this desire to not just focus on white people, but also center Black people and Black stories and Black experience.
Thank you. I am really pleased. I'm encouraged to be here. I'm so touched by what this lecture series has been all about. The first time I discussed this book in an open group was in a small room, couple doors over at the Falmouth Library a few years ago. When I was asked to be on a panel to talk about that social construct called race, I thought long and hard about the intimacy that I would have to be willing to bear in a discussion. And then I came to the coffee open mic at Coffee O on Saturday, and I saw the embrace and the intimacy that was shared and how vulnerable people were, but yet how they were accepted and telling their stories. I mean, there were young people telling their stories. I was so encouraged by their stories. And I said if I was going to be a part of this tonight, I would have to bring it as much as they did. So I'm really hoping that this is a bi-directional conversation. I wrote a few things down because I want to get the dates right, because the dates matter based on the history of the United States. But on my family's paternal side, I am the third generation that was born free. And that's something my son, who we call Trip, because he's the third, I tell him often that he needs to keep in context. Being the son of an African-American albino born in 1908 in the segregated South is only the beginning of the factors that inform my adult view on race. See, race to me has never been based on what you look like, because this black man was my dad. So I've always had a very, very open, embracing definition of black as something you have to tell me you are. Because I've met some real dark people who've told me they're not black. And that's really important for us all to understand. It goes on from there. My dad's grandfather, that man who was a slave until he was 18 years old, who was born in 1851, was also a member of the Confederate Army. Upon his death, after having been owned by someone for all of his formative years, he had raised 8 children and amassed over 200 acres of land in Virginia, of which I'm proud to say I still own 100 acres of. And in that where he is buried on that land is maintained by the Daughters of the Confederacy. So if you want to talk about race, I don't see it as a binary. Now, there's a long story behind that, and there were people who had different experiences in slavery, and there were people who went to war with their slave masters who might have been their fathers, and all sorts of things that kind of mixed it all up. I still have to say, when I'm in the South, I feel a little uncomfortable, but I think it's really important that I always say to young people, the North wasn't good and the South was bad. It's really not that simple. My experience with this book, was a one-sitting experience. I sat down, and this man started talking to me as he was talking to his son, and I think it started at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I put it down when I went to bed that night. It was a Sunday, I'll never forget that day. And I spent the whole time, that whole day, reading and experiencing that story, these stories. I encourage you all to read it. My wife and I very rarely call her my wife because she's not my wife, she's Kimberly, who happens to be married to me. And I moved, as we say, south of the bridge in 1997 to be a part of an affirming, seasonal, multi-generational Black experience, one which embraced progressive racial norms in a communal environment. I moved to Oak Bluffs. And what I found out very quickly was all the Black folks left in September. And I was like, oh my goodness. Now, we fell in love with something more. We fell in love with the physical surroundings. We fell in love with the shared experiences and the relationship one has with nature. We fell in love with the fragile ecosystem. We fell in love with the close proximity that we all have with one another. We fell in love with the beauty of the environment. And the reason I share all those things is because those factors were more compelling factors in my experience in this region than race. Because I learned very quickly, living south of the bridge, we have, as people of color, spent so much time self-segregating and dividing ourselves that there is no voice in this region of people of color. I have offended brown people calling them Black, assuming that. I have learned very quickly that the majority of people of color that I have interacted with have been very accomplished and very successful in other aspects in other places in their life, and have come here to exhale, to take a deep breath and say, I've fought the fight, I just want to relax. I want to put the armor down. You're stressing me out because you're forcing me to get involved. And I get really frustrated when I go to town meeting and I integrate town meeting. I get frustrated when I go to meetings of elected officials of 6 municipalities and I can't find racial diversity. And I understand that I can also then go home and go over a friend's house and sit with a former general, sit with a former admiral, and all be Black men together. That's how bizarre the community is that I live in. So when I think of race, I don't think of a binary of black and white. What I really think about to a large degree is what we as people of color have done to ourselves and to each other to be accepted, to be non-threatening, to get along. And in turn, what we have done is we've diluted any message and any collective experience that can be brought to the equation to make this mosaic of humanity that much more rich. And my challenge with my children and with anybody else of color who's willing to listen to me, and they don't listen to me much anymore because they're grown, 15 being the youngest, is that race to me is an internal experience. It is something that you define for yourself for what it is and what it means. And then you determine how you're going to share it. I can't sit down with an elder Black man in my community who has decided that I just want to chill. I just want to be happy. I don't want to be threatening. I don't want to answer any questions. I don't want to share my experience. and think anything other than that's his experience. I also know that those same men, and I'm thinking of many of them as I'm talking, are the first ones who will come over my house when I'm being challenged because I put myself out there in so many ways and say, we got your back and we're with you. We're just not going to the meeting. We'll see you after the meeting. And I want to share all that with you because I want to say that if you're thinking about race in this community, you got to go much deeper than that. You have to understand the shared experiences. You have to understand that it's much more about economics, about accomplishment, and about stature when you talk about people of color in this community. Because we have done such a phenomenal job separating ourselves from one another that I don't know if I have a shared experience until you tell me we've had a shared experience. I can't tell by the way you talk. And in some aspects of Judaism, I always say that I have a very strong connection because I learned a long time ago in conservative forms of Judaism that what your mother's experience was a significant impact on whether you were accepted or a part of a faith community. And my definition of being an African American black man is who raised you? What was their experience and what did they share with you and what did you have to overcome? So when I meet with someone who says that they were raised by a black woman, I feel like we have a foundation of commonality that I can grow from. That's not to say that if you haven't had that experience, I can't relate to that. But to me, that's the closest definition I can come up with when someone says to me, what does it mean to be a black man in America today? It's what was your mother's experience and what did she have to realize and deal with in raising and most importantly, keeping you safe. Thank you.
I'm going to... Alrighty, I want to open up the history part of this to anyone who would like to ask some questions. And you might have some questions. So, I have a couple filler questions, but you guys might have some too. Would anyone like to start? And I will give you the mic, or you can stand up. I don't really need the mic. I'm a junior high teacher.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I want to thank you three for being here tonight. I saw that this panel was happening on Instagram and really didn't know what to expect, but I'm very grateful I'm here. And, I'm a person of color. I grew up in a biracial home. And I was actually talking to my sister this afternoon about microaggressions. She is a few shades darker than I am. So she gets a lot of microaggressions towards her versus me. And so as you were talking, Kristen, you said that you were pulled over while being black. And there was a murmur of laughter in the audience. And I was very upset by that because I don't find that funny. So I'm wondering if you would consider that to be a microaggression, because sometimes when white people are uncomfortable talking about race, they laugh it off. So I'm wondering if that is a microaggression, like that you would consider it, or if that's just whatever it is. So I'm curious to know your thoughts about that.
It is a really good question. I often find the laughter that happens after I tell a story to be a microaggression, yes. Because it is uncomfortable. It's not something that is conscious. It's something that is just, what do we say? What do we do? This, I had a really recent incident where I called someone HNG. When I grew up, we called people homies and generals, which is a totally, regional term. I said that, and people said, "Oh, she meant HNIC," and and everyone laughed. All the white people laughed, and I was like, "No, it's not funny. I would never call anyone that." So yes, I do think that the laughter can be, and there's so much. The microaggressions happen so unconsciously and so much that we don't realize we're doing it.
I just wanted to say that I think one thing that white people can do to join actively in the conversation is first and foremost to listen and to read, and that's why I'm really grateful that you're putting on this book discussion. And I think that one way we can alleviate our awkwardness and our laughter is to begin to take a look at the history and to really listen. And I just wanted to say that, I'm feeling really awkward right now, but it requires us to hear when somebody tells us that that is disrespectful, and to try to be brave enough to say that we want to be open. And really, that's all.
One thing that I just want to comment on that, and it's not that we're consistent or I'm consistent on when I said race is not a binary. I've never really understood the term white. I've adopted black because I've thought it's a subset of POC, or a lot of people of color. But I've always said I'm black, as long as I can remember. But growing up in an environment that was predominantly non-black, I grew up in Framingham, Massachusetts, I always saw the diversity in people. I always saw the Italians and the Irish and the issues that they had, even though they were both Roman Catholics. I saw the Jews who lived on one side of town, and I saw other ethnic communities, and I saw the young kids, and I saw how a lot of them kind of laughed at their parents of trying to maintain these old world periods. But I don't know where whiteness is. I don't know where Whiteville is, and I don't know who white people are. I think, to me, being white in a lot of respects is an attempt to try to stay asleep. Is an attempt to try to say, if I'm good, everything will be all right. And if I make enough money, I'll be able to retire. To me, whiteness to me is kind of like, I don't really want to think hard. Because anybody I meet who's not a person of color, if I spend enough time talking to them, they show me there's so much more than this abstract category of whiteness.
It's like quotes in the book.
Yes.
Between and
Absolutely, you read the book.
Yeah.
You read the book.
Hi, I wanted to say something in response to this young woman over here, but now that you've said so much, I'm kind of overwhelmed by everything that, well, what I wanted to say to you is that I'm really grateful that you asked that question, because I guess in my white sleepiness, I wasn't aware of a microaggression. I didn't even know that terminology. And so that's really great. I'm just so grateful. And I'm aware of a lot of emotion coming up for me as I'm sitting here, listening, and old emotions from the past, from when I was very young, and my own experience in being white, and being aware of what was happening, because I lived outside of Boston, and being aware of things that I was hearing that were happening for people of color in Roxbury or wherever. And as a boarding school student, I went into Roxbury and did reading with, I was taken in to do that, and a lot of guilt, and all that stuff that isn't important right now. I understand that, but yeah, I really lost where I wanted to go once you started sharing, which was really great. No. So when I asked for the microphone, I really knew what I wanted to say.
Ask for it again.
Yes.
That's okay.
I want to say something that is a response to a couple of things being said. I am an elected official in the town of Yarmouth. And I'm the only person of color in any elected office in the town of Yarmouth. Now, one would say, Yarmouth? How did you get into Yarmouth? Well, to be called a school teacher by people on the street that I live on is an interesting phenomenon. I'm in my yard working, and someone says, when you finish that, can you come down the street and work for me? I'm looking at them saying, who are you? I don't even know you. Well, you are available for work, aren't you? I have a job. Well, what do you do? I'm a teacher. You mean there's colored school teachers here? And I'm thinking my wife is a teacher, and we both grew up together on the same street almost. But the bottom line is, our house is referred to as that's where the colored school teachers live. Going to town meeting, and I'm going to say it up front, just to make sure nobody in here starts getting the kumbaya moment, okay? Going to town meeting as an elected official, putting together budgets and proposals, and I am black and I'm at the mic, and being over-aggressive, I have to turn aggressive to combat the aggression that's coming my way. Well, why would you want to run for office? And you said something earlier, you kind of cracked me up about knocking on doors and getting names. I was in front of Stop and Shop trying to get names on a nomination paper. People walked past me like I wasn't even there. I wouldn't vote for you, the last person on the ballot. And I was the last person on the ballot. But what the point remains is I won. They put other people up because I said I was going to run to defend poor people and elderly people. And I was like, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You were talked into it the day before the nomination papers were due to run against me, and you're going to sit here beside me and say, oh man, nothing personal, right? Well, nobody gave me nothing. Nobody put one dime in the election campaign for me. But, you know, I don't always tell my other stories because there's too many of them. On the same note, when I became part of the state committee for the Democratic Party, and I'm one of the senior members right now, it's an interesting thing. Of all the state committee people on the Cape, 3 of us are people of color out of the 5. And what do you guys do down there? Put a spell on those people? I'm saying, I wouldn't put a spell on anybody. You know, here's the deal. Either you're going to step up and do the right thing when it's the right time to do it, or stay out the program. Because if you're not willing to take a chance, it's not going to happen. And I will tell you this every day to Sunday. Going into Yarmouth Town meeting is like going to war. Particularly when you look around the room and you may see one other person that looks like you, and the rest of the people say, here you go again. You got that crazy point of view. And I'm saying, wait a minute, you don't own the place. I pay taxes too. And some of the people who are not here are waiting to hear what happened here because their lives are impacted by the way you all vote. I'm not talking about school teachers either. I'm talking about regular go-to-work folks who have to pay their bills. I'm going to end it with this statement, and I said this to the people in Boston at the state Democratic headquarters. People are more concerned with pocketbook issues now. They are concerned about what race you are. The pocketbook issues cover everybody. Stop talking about or making general statements that people of color are on welfare. We aren't on welfare. More white people are on welfare than we are. And nobody wants to talk about that. Okay? The second part to this is immigrants and quote, those people. They're code words. Every time you hear it, you know what that means, particularly if you're from that group. People say, those people, who are those people? Or in Yarmouth, there's another way of saying it, in Hyannis too, we don't go to those places at night. Well, what do you mean by, hey man, you might die in Hyannis. The museum is located in Hyannis, the oldest black interracial, interdenominational church That's where the museum is. So when I'm there at midnight or late after programs, I don't have no compulsion about coming out of here, because like I said, I was safer in Dorchester than I am down here. Because I know where not to go in Dorchester. Down here, you can't be sure. We used to do midnight calls. People, I got arrested, can you come bail me out? I wouldn't bail them out. Then got told off. Yeah, man, you need to watch your back. Well, God's with me every second of the day. And I'm going to tell you the truth. There are some days I wonder where other people are with their Lord. Because if you don't have faith, you have nothing.
We got a couple more questions and then we're going to move on.
Hi, thanks to all of you for sharing your stories. I had a question. Well, I wanted to thank you, Kristen, for sharing about the feeling of being invisible. I've been thinking a lot about, so I'm a PhD student here at Woods Hole Oceanographic, and I've been thinking a lot about how to start shifting some of our balance and our diversity in the program. And I feel like a lot of things go wrong because people don't want to put their foot in their mouth, and so they alienate people that are different from them because they don't say anything to them. And I was wondering if any of you could maybe give us some tools or some reassurance that it's better to be awkward, it's better to ask the questions in slightly the wrong way or say something that's just a little bit wrong than to make someone feel invisible, and that if we can ask questions in an open way or make it clear that we are trying to learn, that maybe that's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah, I want to hit it hard just and say that there's no mistakes when you bring sincerity to an interaction with another human. And first of all, thank you very much, so I can make eye contact there and see you there. That meant a lot. I'll stand up a couple times too. People on the way back. If you go into a situation with someone and you are willing to be vulnerable and you express that you're willing to be vulnerable, and they attack that, then you have to understand that what's coming is not you. That's what they're doing. And you have to understand that maybe that will make you stronger. I don't believe that you can say something wrong. I think you can express where you're coming from, and I believe that we can go together to another place. I'm sitting next to a member of the clergy who wrote a beautiful piece about breathing that I read today. Maybe she'll read it to all of you before you end, but it jumps out to me to be the same thing. You can't ask the wrong question. It's just not possible. Not if you're asking from your heart. I'm not guaranteeing what the reaction will be to the question. I'm just saying it's not the wrong question.
I think it's also important to try to relate to people not on the basis of their difference. I think that's, one of the things that I get a lot is someone coming up to me and immediately relating to me by some black person that they know or a black person they saw or something like that. That really bothers me. It's like, that's it for me. I'm just a black face to you. So that's one of the things I would say. And the other thing is, if you're with a person of color and you want to ask them a question about race, saying what you just said, I know this is going to be awkward, I just have to say, ask, and preface it with your knowledge that this is not an easy thing. Because that's, in my experience, much easier to handle what comes out of your mouth then than if you're just like, and just remember that people of color are people. It's not, yes, we have different experiences, and sometimes we don't. So I think that in the effort to relate, we sometimes forget that it's just, how are your kids? How are you? How's your work going or whatever? I think those are things that we all can talk about. It doesn't have to be the first conversation doesn't have to be, I know this black person and they're having difficulty and how do I help them? That doesn't have to be the first conversation.
The biggest struggle I've had as a parent raising 3 young people of color has been because they've lived in an environment where the definition of blackness is so narrow, and they have fell outside of those boundaries, that they have had many friends thinking of awkward questions who have said, well, Danielle, you're not really black, or you're not black. And what I would always say to each of them, and I say to myself, is that person's definition of what it is to be black is so narrow, and it has been defined by media, etc., that if you are educated, if you inspire for academic achievement, if you are lousy in sports, and if you love drama and music and you can play the piano at 12 and read music, that's still a black experience. And those are my children's experiences. And I found it fascinating because when I left and went to college, I went to Boston University. We all show up the first year. Nobody knows everybody. You just know the package that they're in. They don't know where they came from. And I had more fun tripping out non-black people to my intimate knowledge of their experience and knowing their music, because it was my music. So when I talked about Led Zeppelin, it wasn't something I read about, it was something that I loved. You know, when I talked about, you know, lighting a match, because we didn't have cigarette lighters, and talking about Freebird and, you know, Leonard Skinner, I was like, I knew what we were doing. And that was my experience growing up in Framingham. But I realized, okay, let's get over that. Let's get over that real quick, because I am going to go listen to Parliament, and I am going to be right there with One Nation Under a Groove, which is a whole nother musical experience. And that's what college is about, is music. So it's all packaging. And it's all, you break through it really quick and you get to the human inside, and that's where the fun starts.
Yeah, hi, my name is Robert Pina. I grew up in Falmouth, Cape Verde descent. You know, I think that, I want to answer a question that I think this young lady asked, how do I deal with somebody who's black if I want to understand their experience? I think that inherently, most white people, a lot of white people, let me put it that way, a lot of white people are racist. This country is inherently institutionalized and built for white people. And in a place like Falmouth, we're not exempt from that. I came here because I heard this was about the race, and there was going to be discussions about Falmouth. Well, I can tell you, I went to the village school over here back then. Now they call it Mount House School. I was in the 3rd grade, and I remember about 30 white kids getting around me and holding their hands in a circle and calling me Blackie. I fell down on the ground and I was crying. And the teacher came over, a white teacher. I was the only black person in the class. And she didn't reprimand the kids. She said, come on, let's stop this and go back into the school. Which was even more hurtful, to be honest with you. And so, Falmouth has its institutional racial problems. They exist, and I do believe that white people in Falmouth are comfortable with black people as long as they don't challenge the white culture. You see, I find that most white people aren't interested in our cultures, because black people are as diverse as Italians versus Irish and English and everything else. But to them, most of us are just black people, you see? And we're all individuals. But the whole kumbaya thing doesn't cut it with me, because I grew up in West Falmouth and everybody out there was white, and I saw lots of racism, like next door neighbors not talking to you your whole life. You see what I'm saying? And recently in Falmouth we had a judge, what the hell's his name? He's the head of the court. They fired him recently because he used racial slurs to another judge describing a black person sitting in the courtroom. He put the N-word on the kid. Judge said, who are you talking to? That just happened like 6 months ago. I forgot the guy's name. I wish I could remember it. But he was the head of the court talking to another judge. He got fired because they finally had the first black probation officer, and he reported the guy. Okay? So we've had racial incidents then, and we still have them today. The school system. I met with the school superintendent, myself, my Uncle Kenny here, about 2 years ago because, you know, we were in this Hall of Fame meeting where they want to nominate people to be in this athletic Hall of Fame. There's about 8 black people in the Hall of Fame and 120 white people. So we met with them and they said, well, maybe we'll get some of the teachers. One of the people at the meeting said, we'll recruit some of the teachers to, you know, we'll get some black teachers. Well, that person was a non-teacher and realized there's no black teachers in the high school. I think they just got one recently or something. So that was a kind of a tumultuous situation in the meeting. You see, because it's the culture in a town like Falmouth, you're accepted as long as you don't make that white person uncomfortable, okay? But if you're in a meeting, like in those meetings, we talked about race, most white people think that you're insulting them or calling them a racist because it's really about culture as well as color. In fact, and religion sometimes too. You know, I bought a book recently, I haven't had a chance to read it, and it's about how to make a Negro Christian, you see? Because there's a lot of black people that do believe that Christianity is the opiate for white people containing and controlling black people. And to a large degree, I believe that as well, you see. I believe that my culture is important. And so I've traveled around. I understand some of the things that the gentleman here
We stood next to each other at the high school together.
That's right.
At that event. I was very proud to stand next to you, sir.
But I've had a lot of conversations with John Reed because we know a lot of the same people from Boston. We both went to UMass Amherst together. When I went to UMass Amherst, I played on a football team up there. There was 60 people on that football team. Four of us were black. And we could not join a fraternity that they belonged in because of the color of our skin. Okay, that was in a state school paid by tax dollars. When I remember playing Little League Baseball in Falmouth and hearing racial comments coming from the crowd. So this whole kumbaya thing is, you know, I think that where does a white person start? A white person might start by admitting that they got some racism in them. That's where a white person can start, okay? Because if you don't understand that this country is built for white privilege and for white folks, then you'll never get past that. So what I hear some of the folks saying is like, I'm going to respond based on how white people define me. No. I'm going to define me because I'm proud to be black, you see. And I'm also Cape Verdean. And at the time that I was going to school, the school systems here were so negligent with black color, black culture, black literature, and the black experience that I didn't know that at the time that when I was in school, I think the revolution in Cape Verde for independence took place between 1963 and 1975, between the Portuguese who were oppressing the black people that they brought over as slaves. And I'm in a town with a lot of Portuguese people saying, well, I could feel a sense that they felt they had a little bit of a sense of superiority, which I didn't like, you see. I didn't like that. So I found myself backing off from those people. You know, not because, I'd say only because I didn't like their attitude. I thought they were racist. Meanwhile, some of the Cape Verdeans, because of the way and I think Paul Robeson said it best, you know, black people often want to rise in the light of the white man, whoever your oppressor is. And that's what I found some of the Cape Verdeans doing down here, okay? But if you go back and you look at Africa and you study this oppression that happened, that's been happening not just in this country, but it's been an experience that's been going on for years. Western European people have been oppressing black people for years. That's part of what's going on here today. That's what's going on here right now. That's why people can't relate to us. Okay? So race and racism is about power. So when I go to that meeting and they don't want to induct any, they want to put very few black people into this athletic Hall of Fame, which is ridiculous. And when you're in a school system that's 18% minority, I was told by people at No Place for Hate, but there's 2 years ago, there's not one black teacher, not one black administrator in that school. You see, in my opinion, that's not by default. That didn't happen. That happens on purpose. That wasn't serendipitous. That was the racial construct that we live in today in the society. Okay? And until white folks can admit that they're racist, and that's okay. I mean, there's some white people I don't like. There's a lot of white people I don't like. So let me say this to you. There's some black people, but I will tell you something right now. I'm comfortable. I'm proud being black. I want to be black, and I am black, you see. And there's nothing in that cultural thing of listening to their music and going to their churches. Because most black people, I know when I was growing up as a kid, if I was in a church or in a school with all white folks, I really felt it was their deal. I felt it was their deal. Now, I sued a group of people from West Falmouth. I was working on a real estate development. And I went up and saw people of the Mass Commission Against Discrimination. And we started the suit, you see. And so they told me that in the town of Falmouth, they said that Falmouth was like about the 5th highest ranking town beginning suits, but they also settle. You see, they also settle a lot because they don't want people to know who they really are. You see, they'd rather settle and pay some cash and not be looked at as a racist. So when I go to those meetings, just talking about race in front of a lot of white people in this town makes them feel like they're being attacked. You know, we broke a record here in one of those meetings because I encouraged and recruited like 7 black people to go to that meeting. And we sat there with 12 white people and we said, wow, like we just kind of broke a record here. Like there's never been this many black people in a meeting. So many things have happened in this town that have got to do with race, you see? And people have to admit that. So trying to feel good in front of the other person and cozy is one thing, but looking at your own self, it's like looking at Donald Trump. How can a person say they're a Christian? How can a person say they're a Christian and believe in Donald Trump?
I'm gonna segue over. I have a one waiting up front, but I think I think we have to stop at this part and we're gonna let them talk. The panel talks if the panel is here, and then we're gonna take some more questions.
I'm gonna be quick. I'm gonna be quick because I have a cold, but I wanted to say a couple of things. Somebody mentioned something up there about music. Well, back in 1971, Marvin Gaye said, music has no race, it only has space. Remember that? It's odd that it's 1971 that comes from. To help you, like Mr. Pina, my family goes back, way back, to the 1900s when they first lived here in Falmouth, 1903. And, to improve, let's say, your education, which is what I thought you were asking in terms of can I relate to other people? Not just black people, just other people, It's important to think of them as someone that is very much like you, regardless of their skin color, I know when I came to Falmouth many years ago, I came from Baltimore. I'm going to try to keep this quick. I came from Baltimore, and as you know, Baltimore is slightly different than Falmouth. And, when I met people that looked like me, they happened to say they were Cape Verdean. I'm Cape Verdean. However, because my parents lived all over, because my father served his country, he never talked about being Cape Verdean or anything related to race, And when I came here, it was rather unusual because I had never really heard of Cape Verdeans. And, I can remember very distinctly, they were telling me, we're going to go to the big city. We're going to have a good time. And I'm thinking, man, this big city, it sounds pretty wild. Where is it? Well, the big city was New Bedford. And when I went to New Bedford, I said, wow, I want to go back to Baltimore. But to help you out and be very, very quick, and to be a little bit, to bring up something that's a little bit different than what's going on tonight. I'm currently living in Mashpee. Recently, we had a situation in the Mashpee school system where a custodian was called nigger. okay? And, you know, he didn't like it, and I wouldn't like it. And, you know, I happen to be a guy that doesn't even prefer to be known as, oh, that's a black guy, because of what it means. You know, I'm a guy, you know, and that's it. And we had a situation over there where some young kid called somebody of color a nigger, and the superintendent decided to place that janitor on a different shift. Well, this was in the newspaper, it was in the Mashpee Enterprise. The town of Mashpee stood up for that janitor. They said, wait a minute, it's videotaped, the janitor did not retaliate. Why are you giving him a different shift? He has a family member at home that's ill and needs to be attended to at night. Why not do something with that kid? Well, the rumor is the kid is on a football team or some sort of team. It might not be football. And it seems like they didn't want to, you know, curtail the income because of this kid being disciplined, you know? So I have to say, for the town of Mashpee, I'm really proud that they stood up for this janitor who did not lose his shift, you know? And this young kid definitely needs to be disciplined, and hopefully the people in Mashpee school system will hear this. But I want to say it's very nice to meet you guys, and you know, as far as I'm concerned, I try not to look at people as their color. I know there's a tremendous amount of racism in the world today. The other day I had a door installed in my house, a new patio door by Anderson. I highly recommend it. But when I was talking to the installer, you know, we were talking and talking and talking, and he was talking about how his father told him to come back to Howardsport to get a job in the fire department. And he said he did that. He came back and he wanted to get a job there, but he didn't get the job because at the time they were hiring veterans and Afro-Americans. Now I'm looking at this guy, and at this point, this was a white guy. And, you know, instead of grabbing a knife and taking care of the white guy, I told him, you know what, man? It's a good thing that, you know, we're now sharing the wealth. And that was the end of the conversation, just like this is the end of my conversation.
This poor lady's been waiting to ask you a question, so next time we're going to try to stick to questions.
I'm Olivia White from Falmouth, and I'm also a washer-shore. I don't like the title when people say white people or black people. We are all part of human race. We are all human. So I'm going to give you a little biology lecture. I've been a biology professor for 20 years, and my field is genetics. And when I taught genetics in my class, I told my students, doesn't matter what you look like, we all have the same DNA. If you look at your DNA, and if you look at the genes that you have, out of thousands of genes, 99.9% genes we humans share together. It is that less than 1% genes that you have that may make you look different in skin color, color of your eyes, texture of your hair. These are minor differences. So the take-home message is, we have more in common. We should celebrate that university, that part that we have in common. And when you grow up, this is what I tell my students, if you go to the hospital, if you need a blood transfusion, if you need an organ transplant, you don't say, I want an organ from somebody who's from India, because I don't want it for white folks or black folks. That's not what you say. You want a liver transplant, you want a blood transfusion. We have same thing in common. So my challenge to all of you is that go out, make friends with somebody that looks different than you, go have coffee with them, invite them to your house for dinner, have conversation, and you will realize how much they are alike. You can have same conversation, and you will really find yourself being learned something, and you will be much richer. Thank you.
All right, here we go. So where do we go from here? There are a room full of people here who have a voice. I know I was told earlier that people should tell their story. And I'm going to ask you a very fundamental question. You know what's going on in this country today. We have not progressed. We have gone backwards. Matter of fact, it's almost okay for people who used to be quiet to say whatever they want today and do whatever they want. Now, you know, I'm a firm believer that at some point in time, you can't be quiet. You have to stand up for what you believe in. And it doesn't matter how passive, quiet you are, you still have opportunities. And the opportunities is, I'm looking out there saying to myself, there's a voting block in this room right now. Is there anyone in here willing to stand up and take the mantle and say, I want to do the right thing for the people in the neighborhood? Well, I told you this earlier, and I'm going to go back to it again. When I decided to run for office in Yarmouth, they all looked at me like I was crazy. Well, I'm going to look at you like you're crazy. Somebody in this room could be the next state rep, select person, or a change maker in bringing the agenda back to Central at least. We can't go backwards anymore. I mean, you have a situation going on now, and I'm going to say right up front, how are you going to declare war against the world as a single person? I worked for Ted Kennedy down in Washington, D.C. as an intern with the NEA. Protocol going into the Capitol building or going near the White House was so tight, we used to have 6 a.m. briefings about what you should do, what you should not do, what you should wear, the color of the day, the color of the tie, and the book just about that thick that says, Your Code of Ethics. It's almost like that book got thrown in the fireplace and there's no rules. Well, there is rules. I can't wait for November. I can't wait for November. And I mean, and I will not curse, I mean, one person at a time. Anybody that doesn't agree with you, they need to go. It's a pocketbook issue. You're spending money for people taking trips, taking planes, wasting money on what? A wall? Are you kidding me or what? That wall can never be built on time. Matter of fact, it will not be built when his time is over. So I won't mention his name because you all know who I'm talking about. But nevertheless, let's get serious here. For all of the pain, anguish, and reverse of everything that was done, if you don't believe that he intentionally took away every progressive thing Barack Obama proposed, you're sleeping. It is not about, and Robert, you're right, man. It wasn't about anything short of, I can't deal with a guy who used to be president, who is still running around here as slick as they come, but I took away everything. We're going to reverse all those things because he did bring it up and put it into place. You can use an executive order for whatever you want, but I don't want to pay for it. I think we already paid the price. We're still here. So while we're here, let's do something about it. Peace and power.
Vote is number one. But I also want to talk about some of the things you can do here in Falmouth, here on the Cape, that are small and easy to do. And one of those things is to pay attention to who's around you and who's not. You can be the person. I was at the gym the other day, and I got to tell you, this the most amazing thing happened, and you probably won't think it's amazing, but it was. A woman was coming towards me, and I said, I'm sorry if I'm in your way, I'll move. And she said, what if I'm in your way? And it was so amazing to me for someone to see me, to acknowledge that I am not always the problem, I'm not always in the way, and to say, well, maybe it's me. And so perhaps sometimes it is you, and that you have the power to step back and let someone else come forward. And to me, that's really quite powerful when you are seen, when your story is heard, when the multiple stories of people, and you don't assume everyone's one, when you notice who's not in the room. It's interesting to me that all of us are really not Falmouth residents. And when I was asked, I said, but I'm not from Falmouth. My parents actually live here, but I'm not from Falmouth. And I think it's important that if we're talking to people in Falmouth, that you have some people here who can speak for what's going on for them in Falmouth. I also think noticing when an incident is happening and not stepping away. You know, when you notice someone is being discriminated against, so often we turn and we don't want to do anything about it. We can't do anything about it. But we can. We have the power to speak, to say, no, this is wrong. People say this to me all the time, but that's such a small thing. You don't do it, though. You have that power, but you don't do it. And I don't understand. That's the piece I really don't understand, is why when you can step forward, when you have so much power that you don't. You don't say, why isn't there a black person teaching? Why aren't there many people of color teaching in Falmouth or in Hyannis or somewhere else? I mean, why not? And you all can get together and say, we want teachers of color. We want multiple teachers. And also to talk about race in terms, you know, if you don't want to talk about race in terms of just black and white, I think it's really important. We have such a culturally diverse community, and we're ignoring a lot of the pain that's going on in other communities here. So, you know, some of those things I think we all can do. And I do think it's important to understand that unless you build relationships across diversity, you will not have you won't have ownership over this issue. You know, it's just something we come and hear about, but until we start building relationships and start, you know, working together, I really don't, I'm not talking kumbaya, I'm talking real relationships. And unless we start being in places together more often and talking with one another more often, we will not get through this. It is a systemic problem as well, and we have to look at how do we decentralize white privilege and white supremacy. How do we, I mean, which may take taking down or taking apart some of the systems we have created that were for rich, land-owning white men. That's how our country was built. And all of our systems want to hold that up. So how do we say there's more than that in this world? So I think those are some of the things that I would suggest.
All of that, and like I said when I first came, we do, as humans, do such a wonderful job in segmenting ourselves. And I believe race is just another example of how we work really diligently to create irrelevant distinctions on a certain level. It's not something you can be unaware of. You must be aware of. It exists. Race exists. But you cannot let it drive you. I believe this whole conversation is an internally focused, spiritual conversation. I believe that you must first be grounded and be happy and in love with yourself. Because if you haven't done that, you can't do anything else. So I think we all can do by being quiet, turning the distractions off, and asking yourself how much you really like yourself. And you don't have to answer it to anyone else, so you don't have to cheat. And if you really can get to a point where you like yourself, you can start this journey of bringing humanity together. And I laugh because the phrase was used often. I'm a lifelong Unitarian Universalist. I didn't come to it, it's my whole life. I love the song Kumbaya.
I did too.
I love Morning Has Broken.
Me too.
I love Cat Stevens even when he became Yusuf. I don't know his new name now. It's been there for a long time. But I love humanity. I love intimate relationships with people when they are willing to be vulnerable with me so I can be vulnerable with them. And I also know that sometimes I need to go into my private space with some people with common experiences so that I can get strong, so that I can go back out into the greater world. But I personally believe that when I insert myself into an experience, I'm helping make the experience better. And I love being around people who feel the same way. And I get off being around people who really believe they have something to offer. And if there are a bunch of black folks who don't really feel that way, I'm not excited to be with them. I want to be with people who are passionate about who they are. I also need to, like we say in the airplane, put your own oxygen mask on first before you try to help others. So please put your own oxygen mask on, because you can't help me or anyone else if you aren't brave enough to help yourself. And I laugh at when we talk about bizarre distinctions of municipalities, and we talk about Falmouth versus Mashpee versus Oak Bluffs. I mean, most people think of Martha's Vineyard as this island. You can't find Martha's Vineyard when you get off the boat. You're in one of 6 distinct towns. We work really hard to be different over there. And we laugh at people off island who think we are Martha's Vineyard, because we are not Martha's Vineyard. You gotta look at all that stuff and say, is it really worth it? Am I getting anything out of distinguishing myself from a Chilmarkian? Do I really get anything out of that? No, I got some cool people in Chilmark. But you know, you just have to start by putting your own oxygen mask on and not being afraid of making mistakes to the person at who we back there, and just love yourself. That to me is the answer.
We want to wrap this up. There are a lot of white people that fight for the black cause, but I'm always disappointed if a black person doesn't. We got to fight for what we want. Just like white folks came to this country and were uninvited and fought. And you're not going to get, I don't care if we're black or white. When we get what we want, it's because there was a fight and a struggle. And as a black person, I understand that and realize that if I'm not going to fight, I don't care who it's against. I'm not going to get it. And it pertains to race as well. Thank you.
We have about 5 more minutes, so I want to let anybody who wants to ask a last question. And but before that, can I thank you all? This has been a fabulous night. Thank you very much. Yeah, she's waiting right here. So I'm going to take a couple more questions, and then I'll dismiss the clock.
Hello, my name is Susan Wellicke, and I have a book club with the Falmouth Senior Center. And yesterday, I was bemoaning the fact that when I go to Falmouth Forum, I don't see a diverse group. When I come to my book club, I don't see a diverse group. Very often when I come to this library for lectures, I don't see a diverse group. And one of the women said to me, well, you know, people are in their own groups, and they feel comfortable in their own groups. And it's not that we're excluding people, it's that people are comfortable in their own groups. And I want to know what you think about that.
Oh, we had a TV show called Cheers, and people used to laugh at my reaction, but I was always struck by the theme, because the theme was like, everyone wants to go where everyone knows their name. It's like it's embedded in our culture to find familiarity. It's the rare person that looks for a different experience to be embraced by. Most people look for commonality. We huddle together. So I don't say that's bad or that's good. I think it's the reality. The person that goes out and says that person looks fundamentally, has a totally different experience than me, I'm going to have a great time with them, that's a unique person. That's kind of who I am.
I also think, though, that sometimes there are a lot of us who are in multiple different groups. I think that one of the problems with this conversation about race is we're always put in one group. I have to be black, Christian, and I'm not, you know, I'm not Christian. But I'm also Jewish. I'm also someone who came from poverty. I'm someone who has lived in multiple different places. So I'm not just one group. So I think also that when people say they're more comfortable in a group, for me it's like that is an excuse in some ways to not expand what your group looks like and feels like. And so yes, I think it takes some courage or some personality that likes change, but I also think if you talk to me mostly, it depends on what music you want to talk about, or do you like to dance, or what books have you read? I bet you find that I read the same books.
But people aren't finding that out because they're not meeting each other.
Exactly.
I'd like to talk about separation for a moment. In the middle of my life, where I find myself now, I have a greater sense of isolation than ever before. And I think that's one of the universal conditions of being a human being. I think we're all here tonight so that we don't have that feeling of separation. And yet our conversation is about that. I read Between the World and Me. I listened to it read to me by the author about a year ago. And it was one of the most moving experiences of my life to listen to his words to his son. And it made me think about, what can I say to my own son, raising him here in this beautiful place that I love, that my husband and I feel like this is our home. We came here 18 years ago, and we won't be, natives for another 8 generations, but this is our home. And I struggle to find, in this community that I love, good representation of the people that I count as my friends. I have college friends, I have work friends in Rhode Island who represent the diversity of the human race very well, and yet when I come home and I go to the library or I go to the grocery store, I see a very white place. And I've been doing a lot of internal searching, because I'm not wondering, why aren't all the black people hanging out where I'm hanging out? I'm thinking, what am I doing that is keeping me separated from these other people that I know live here? A friend of mine works in racial justice in terms of birthing, and the statistic I didn't hear mentioned tonight are the outcomes for African American women in birthing, which are, every single person should stand up and be appalled at the outcomes for black women in America giving birth. She pointed me towards another book called Waking Up White that I urge every white person in the room to read, because it helped me to understand, especially growing up in New England in this good Christian Yankee WASP world that we have here in the not so bad as the South place. Helped me recognize the things that I was raised to do to be a good girl, that really work to uphold racism. I am a racist in what I do because I'm trying to be a good white girl, and I don't even know it. I don't even know that I am benefiting from the white privileges that I have, because that's sewn into society so deeply. It's intentionally, I'm not supposed to see it, but I have to see it now. It's a humbling experience to come to the meeting tonight. I'm so glad. Thank you to everyone who made this happen and continues to have events happen, because I have a lot of work to do to be the person I want to be. I need to stop being a good white girl. I've actually always been pretty bad at that. And I realize it's because of my heritage is not perfectly Anglo. There's a lot in this conversation, and I thank you all so much. And I want to know what kind of conversations do you have with your kids, whether they're your own children by birth, or your children in school, or your children in your congregation, like what Coates says to his son. Thank
We
you.
have real conversations. But my kids don't only come when they have a problem. And they have a problem every day. I'm not even in school anymore. I'm at a museum. And I will tell you, most people who come to visit at the museum, they don't want to see what's in there. They want to talk about their problem. So it has not become just a museum. It's almost like a therapy center. And I want to tell you, it's nothing wrong with people coming in. Everybody across the board shows up for some reason or another for a conversation. A lot of people just want a one-on-one or small group, and that's okay. But we have that conversation. I have my own saying, it's not how we are different, it's what do we have in common. Because humanity is in common, but when you need to take care of somebody's problem, you need to have an answer for them. At least somewhat lead them to a solution. They would not come to you unless they believe you can do something.
Either of you want to take that question? I know I have one more question right here.
We're good.
For you.
Good.
We're good.
I don't know whether or not I'm starting something at the last minute. I haven't heard too much about education. It seems to me, as a Chinese American born and raised in the U.S. and educated in white American public schools, not a lot of Asians in the room, I don't think. There we go. You haven't talked about the role of education and what's missing, with perhaps some notable exceptions. Aren't Americans not teaching about the role of African Americans and other people of color? We learn something about our Irish heritage, our Spanish heritage maybe, certainly our Western European heritage, but we don't learn much except caricatures about people of color who are part of America. We don't teach it in our schools. So that means the only place a child can learn it is in their home, and that's a little hit or miss, depending on the parenting that's going on. So,
Steve, it's interesting you were saying that when you said education, the first reaction I had was education has been the way out for so many. It's been the way out in my family. My parents are so over-degreed. I just got a bachelor's. Clearly the institutions that we were involved in had something that they could improve upon when it comes to the diversity of the experience. But I see the young people in my family seeking that out. I mean, my daughter's in school in the Upper West Side now at Barnard, and the experiences that she's having in an ethnically diverse environment are phenomenal between what's happening at her school in Columbia. So it's there, and it's amazing, but you got to go get it. You have to go get it.
but I guess I was really targeting that towards white Americans that don't have this sensitivity. And by the way, as a Chinese American, I don't claim to have as much sensitivity as I should towards African Americans, because I was isolated in my own little world, which is my world, and had its shortcomings. But my experience as I listen to the crowd, and particularly those in this room who are white Americans, in some respects, I would say, don't be too hard on yourself, because I don't know that you were educated to have that human sensitivity that was brought up by this nice woman over here. We're all human beings, and our genetics are 99% all the same, but we don't teach that in our schools, with some exceptions.
You take her class.
Yes.
Let me answer you directly and not pull no punches. We are not teaching academics anymore. Education has been hijacked by test makers and test takers. Okay? When I taught real academic history. I taught African American history. My brother down the back knows we had that at Barnstable when he was there. We had it here in Falmouth. It slowly got swept out the door because now you have to take a test. When you tell people you can't cursive write anymore, but printing is the only acceptable norm in elementary school, it took me all summer to teach 3 kids how to write their name with the old chart. And I asked their parents, how are they going to go into the world and get something that they need when they don't know how to write their own name? I didn't say print, I said write. I challenge administrators to do the following. Stop acting like you have all the answers and listen to the people who pay the bills. Because sometimes parents are embarrassed to go to school and ask the question that needs to be asked because the people in the school don't want them there. I spent 37 years behind the iron curtain. Okay? Yeah, I'll say it just like that. And I hope the TV picks me up. Because I can't get fired now and I already retired. Okay? I spent 37 years behind the iron curtain. It is, don't say too much or you will be fired. But wait a minute, hold it. I'm fired because I oppose MCAS. I'm fired because the test makers are in Texas and you can't get anybody else here. There is another test called Paraxis for MTEL and Paraxis. If you want to be a teacher, you got to take MTEL in this state. In other states, Paraxis is perfectly acceptable. We've been fighting with the Department of Ed to accept both of them. They say no. And the question always is, why not? Because we have a contract. Well, you know, nobody told you what agroeconomics was either, but China figured it out since you say you're Chinese. They figured out which states to sanction because of this tariff. Notice what they sanction are places that are still lying to people about American history. American history, from an African American perspective, is before the Mayflower. Okay? We were here before the Mayflower. We've been part of this whole place for the entire duration. But no one talked about this except for you, that some parentage were part of the Confederate Army. There were plenty of people part of the Confederate Army who were colored. And Native people were part of that consortium too. When I taught history, we used to teach what is called linear history, this way. Not chronological, that way. Linear. Pick the year and go around the globe and find out what happened. Rather than just talking about 1492 down. Because everybody knows what 1492 does, but do you know what 1865 was, 1867, what really happened in constitutional change? 14th and 15th Amendments. All right? They don't want to talk about that. I used to teach civics. It's funny that you bring that up. This first thing that went out the door was civics. How do you get somebody, and I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. How do you get somebody elected that you like? Or that wants to speak up and get things done? Those people have to go to meetings and scream at people. And then escorted out by a police officer. By the way, I've been escorted out plenty of times. You're not the first one. All right? And I'm just saying this to you because it is kind of tough when my wife is still teaching, and this is her last year. And you know, I thank God for my wife, but I'm just saying this to you. She has to tell me to be quiet. She didn't even want me to come out here. She was afraid that somebody might hear me talk out here and take it out on her tomorrow morning when she goes to work. Okay? The retaliation piece is real. It's not like you have patriots in hiding. No, the patriots who speak up get sanctioned. And I will tell you, just like this, you could be the smartest person in the building, but you never get promoted. I know of 4 cases in Falmouth that we had to work on to get people promoted. And Well, where is she at? Sandy, you still there? Okay. She single-handedly put it on the line for a teacher of color. Instead of promoting the person, they gave her a pension. All right? And I know the person very well because me and her husband are the best of friends. But the bottom line is this. Education, the way it used to be, is not that way anymore. Education is business now. Think of your New Falmouth High School. Who's paying for it? You are. I'm not paying for it. I don't live here. You are. Indirectly, I might be paying for it. But the business of contracts, the business of everything else, and if anybody is anti-union in here, I used to be the president of the Barstow Teachers Association. So that's why I knew I wasn't getting fired. Okay? But the deal goes this way. When I had to go fight for the rest of the teachers, well, why are you the one speaking up? My teachers didn't miss a payday. But I have to remind them, have some dignity in yourself. You don't like the way things are, let's go talk to the principal. Don't sit in the teacher's room complaining, let's go do something about it. It starts off with parents, retired folk who have nothing to lose, and concerned citizens. Because if you don't speak up, it stays the same. And my sister here is still in the classroom and knows the struggles we go through. I'm going to tell you, I used to buy food for kids and put it in my office because they came to school hungry and I already was in a foul mood before they even started. They knew they could come to my office and get something to eat. And I had the food in it. They knew what cabinet was in. The teachers wouldn't let them come get it. I used to say, well, I tell you what, when that kid starts acting up in class, don't send them down to my office because that's what you're going to send them to. I'm the problem solver, so to speak. Saying, well, wait a minute, you know, 90% of the kids I deal with are white kids. Why are you sending them to my office when you know already why they're coming to my office? Because they're acting up to get out of your class. They didn't hear what they wanted to hear. As far as African American kids and Cape Verdeans who went to Barnstable High, I single-handedly told their parents, stop sending them to vocational school. The mantra back in the 60s and 70s was, you don't need to go to the college section. You need to go to vocation school. I know, but I got good news and bad news for you. Vocational school may be the place to be right now.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much.